Hello students, my name is Aman Sharma and today we are going to start the second part of chapter 6, Weavers, Iron Smelters and Factory Owners. As we have discussed in the previous section, means in the first part, we discussed about how the cotton industry got declined in India, then how the cotton textile production boomed up during First World War. Now, in this section or in part 2, we are going to discuss about the iron smelters condition and the factory owners, how the factories came up in India. Now, the first topic that we have is iron smelters. Iron smelters, before knowing about the iron smelters, it is important to know about the smelting process. The process of obtaining a metal from rock or soil by heating it into a very high temperature or of melting objects made from metal in order to make something new. So simply the process of extraction of metal from its ore is known as smelting, and the smelters are the people who were busy in this work. Generally, there were some iron smelters, means local iron smelters, like they were living in Bihar and central India. What they used to do, they used to collect the local deposits of iron ore, and they make and they extract iron from these ores and make simple weapons from this, like sword, like bow and arrow. So these were the simple work of the local iron smelters. One very important and very special thing that we are going to discuss here is about the wood steel. It was a famous type of steel that was produced in India. The best example of this wood steel we can find as the sword of Tipu Sultan, who was the tiger of Mysore. He died in 1799 against the last fourth war or Anglo-Mysore war with British, and now his sword is kept in England Museum. Characteristic, if we talk about the characteristic of this sword, we can find very sharp edge and flowering pattern. What is the speciality of this sword? That this sword was very hard and have the sharp edges which can easily rip through the opponent's armor. Means the sword is very hard and it can cut down the armor of the opponent. So next we have this woods. Let's talk about how this wood steel is prepared. Iron was mixed with charcoal and put into small clay pot by maintaining the right temperature. This technique was told by Francis Buchanan, and he was the person who explained this process of making of wood steel. It was not only produced in Mysore but also in West and Central Asia. So we can say that wood steel was famous all over the world, and this wood steel, the characteristic and the feature of this wood steel fascinated European scientists. One very famous European scientist was Michael Faraday, who discovered who discovered the relationship between electricity and electromagnetism. He spent his 4 years to study about the properties of this wood steel from 1818 to 1822. Now, this wood steel have different name at different places. Like English, it is known as woods. Now in Kannada, it is known as Vukku, Telugu, it is known as Hakku, and Tamil and Malayalam, it is known as Urukku. Now, decline of Indian iron smelting industry. As we discussed that there were local iron smelters who used to live, who have their livelihood through this iron smelting industry, and slowly this iron smelting industries declined in India. So what were the reasons? By the 19th century, the craft of iron smelting was in decline. Means the local iron industries were declining. What were the reasons? The first reason was the new and special series of forest laws that Britishers came up with. They restricted the areas of forest and they do not allow the local people to enter into the forest. Next, there were some areas where government, means British government, allowed the local people to enter into the forest and use the furnaces there that were made in the forest. But for that, they have to pay high taxes to the forest department. Next was it was declined because at the same period of time, British or Britain was also importing the raw iron from Britain to India. Now, the iron smiths in India started using the imported iron to manufacture utensils and implements. So, hence, the local iron smelters were not able to provide their iron to the local iron smiths. Large demand was there for iron and steel, which required for the construction of railways. And for this construction of railway, they were only dependent on the steel that they get from the England. The very famous scientists or very famous engineers of this of who came from Britain, they do not believe that iron or steel of India can be so much stuff hard that they can use it as in it in the railway industries. Iron and steel industry come up India. Like we discussed, that iron and steel industry that was managed by the local iron smelters that declined, and now the entrance of industries done in India. If we talk about 1904, there is a story of that two very eminent personality. One was Charles Weld, who was an American geologist. The second was Dorabji Tata, eldest son of Jamshedji Tata. Both were wandering in the forest of Chhattisgarh. They were traveling there for in search of some finest quality of iron ore deposit. They saw that some men and women were carrying basket loads of iron ore. They were the Agrias. Agrias, when they were asked by the Jamshedji Tata, Dorabji Tata, that from where they are coming with this iron ore, then they pointed towards a hill, and the name of that hill was Rajara Hill. There they found one of the finest ore in the world, but they were not able to establish industry there. The reason was very dry. That was the problem. Now later in 1962, Vilai steel plant with the help of USSR, it was established. Here you can see Bhilai steel plant in the state of Chhattisgarh. As they were not able to establish an industry at Bhilai or in Chhattisgarh because the region was very dry, they came to Jharkhand back and established an industrial township in Jamshedpur just on the bank of river Subranakha. Now it started producing iron and steel in 1912. The name of this industry was TISCO, that is Tata Iron and Steel Company. This was the same time when the India was importing steel from Britain for the construction of railway or different purposes. British experts in Indian railways were initially unwilling to believe that good quality of steel could be produced in India. But it was happening. India was producing very fine quality of steel in India, but the British experts were not ready to accept it. Here comes the First World War. As we discussed that in the case of cotton industry also, as the First World War started, the British Army required many clothes, different types of army clothes. So the import to India decreased. Similarly, the iron and steel that Britain was exporting to the India, it was also decreased. It was also declined, and now the Indian Railway started using the steel that was supplied from the TISCO. By 1919, colonial government was buying 90% of steel manufactured by TISCO. Now, how this First World War affected the market of textile and iron smelting? As we discussed, that the nationalist movement developed and the demand of industrial class also became stronger, because in the previous section we discussed that the clothes, the cotton clothes or the iron that were imported to India from Britain, there was no such kind of duties or taxes that British government put on those products. Now, as the industrial class of India itself developed, they started demanding the government protection. Struggling to retain its control over India, the British government had to concede many of these demands in the last decade of colonial rule, as after the First World War and totally by the Second World War, the British control over India decreased, and hence the British government had to accept the demands that were put forward by the industrial class people. Thank you for watching.